Hey, hey. Oh, it is Monday afternoon, and it's not a hot day in the SIP, but it is a very humid day in the SIP. It's supposed to start storming here in about an hour. So I thought I would come on and do this live right quick. Now, hi, Francisca. I haven't really talked about it here on Instagram, but I have talked about it a couple of times. I briefly mentioned it over on my personal profile on Facebook. I was recently adult diagnosed as having combined type ADHD. And it actually floored me. There was a huge surprise in all of this, which I will get to in a moment because people were asking me a lot of details. They were wanting guidance around how did I come to the conclusion that I should go get tested for ADHD at 53. So I'm going to give you just like a very quick 30,000-foot view of what my life was looking like that pushed me to get online and say, there has to be something else here. So if you're just joining in and you don't know me, I'm not going to go into a big bio because that's not what this is about. But I am a board certified hypnotist. I was also in healthcare for 25 years. I was a nurse and a nurse anesthetist. Well, once a nurse and a nurse anesthetist, always a nurse and a nurse anesthetist, at least from a mindset perspective. But I give that for context because those are two very busy professions. Busy where you're constantly on your feet, busy where you're constantly in and out of situations that you have to adapt to on the fly. And that's one of the reasons why these symptoms were masked for so long for me. So I've been a hypnotist since 2013, but I was still in healthcare until 2019. And that is when I went full time in my business. And for a year at that point, I had been immersed in personal development and mindset. As a part of that process, there was a huge focus on mastering my thoughts and attention, which is very important. Learning awareness, which is basically mindfulness. Where is your attention? Because one of the things that trips people up in life so much is we get so caught up in the things that we have to do that we're not aware of where our thoughts are. And I'm giving you all of this for perspective and context so that you'll really be able to grasp the depth of what I was experiencing just a few months ago. So, I do self hypnosis. I've had my own directed root cause hypnosis to address things around fear and anger and grief. And, that habit we get into of, chastising ourselves, beating ourselves up, shame, guilt, all the things. I had done all that. But from 2019, that started in 2018 until now, I continue all the time to work on myself. And I've exclusively done one on one work with clients who are on a personal transformation journey. Back in 2019, I stopped doing smoking, I stopped doing weight loss, I stopped doing the nail biting and all the other things and focused solely on clients in this transformational state of constantly peeling layers and elevating. And that meant I had to continually peel my layers and elevate to help them. So, part of the things that I take clients through and that I take myself through is when I have emotions and feelings, as objectively as I can, I go through and I identify those emotions and feelings and I peel back those layers because I know that when we're in an emotional state, we can either have an accurate perception or the perception is not accurate. And I'm sure probably everybody who ends up watching or listening to this will have at least once in their life had a moment where they got triggered. And then 5 seconds later, it's like, oh crap, I really overreacted. Why did I do that? That would be an example of an emotion that in the moment was not based on an accurate perception. And I understand what it means to process and neutralize those two sets of emotions. So I apprenticed with the shaman, but before I started apprenticing with the shaman, his brother in law was my coach. And he always talked about the answers being within. And before we just ask for somebody to give us the answer or the solution, to attempt to uncover that for ourselves. And sometimes I do that to a fault and come to find out that's an ADHD trait, the behavior that leads to doing something to a degree that neurotypicals would not do. So, in the last year and a half, I was finally ready to scale my business. I had decided what I wanted to do to scale my business really big and to begin to take myself out of one to one, because up until then I was 100% one on one, except for, trainings 2 or 3 times a year, or self hypnosis workshops a couple of times a year, and a retreat that I would do. Hey, Camden. And so when I really decided what I wanted to do last year, I have the roadmap. I've had the coaches. I've got the strategy. And I would find myself on this roller coaster. Now, I'm a manifesting generator as well. So I had addressed the human design aspect, making sure I'm aligned and joyful in what I'm doing and all those things, waiting for my sacral to respond before I jump into things so I wouldn't overwhelm or overload myself. But I would still go through these cycles where I would have a day where I could work for 12 hours straight. I wouldn't even take a break to eat. Like, I wouldn't stop until I realized I was hungry. I was so hungry I had a headache, like the headache would stop me. And that's when I would realize, and I would think, my God, I really wish I could get into flow like this all the time. I can get 2 weeks of work done in 12 hours. So that would be one habit. Then I would end up crashing, and then I wouldn't have the energy or the momentum. And then coming out of the backside of that would be me knowing what I needed to do, not being able to start. Now, most people think not being able to start, they think, oh, you're procrastinating. It's fear, you're procrastinating. Well, consider everything that I shared up until this point around all the work, self exploration, self investigation, if you will. When I would do that, I had no fear, but I could not explain what was happening. So I want to share with you what was going on there. Those 12 hours of getting so much work done, that was not flow. That is called hyper focus. It's called hyper focus. And what it does is it will push us to basically like burnout. And because we get so much done when we're in that state, when we are not in that state, we begin to question why we can't be in that state all the time. And we will begin to gaslight ourselves. And I was doing a lot of that. I was gaslighting myself. I'm like, there has to be something wrong. I've done time blocking. I've tried Pomodoro. I've tried to create systems for myself to be able to get these things done, and it's not happening. And I could not understand why. In March and August of last year, those were two of the worst months I had had in a very long time, mentally and emotionally. And I did all the things to pull myself out of it, and pushing through just wouldn't work. Now, something else. So I talked about the hyper focus. I talked about the crash and burn, the knowing you need to start something and you just can't start. That's kind of twofold. Part of it is executive function, and just it's funny because people say just decide and do the damn thing. Well, I decided, but it's like there was this switch. Hi, Sammy. It's like there was this switch that wasn't getting flipped. And I cannot accurately express the emotions that you feel when you know you need to move and you can't. And managing my attention and managing my emotions, you probably, if you go back and you listen to the podcast episodes for the last year, you would hear me talk a lot about having grace with yourself, having compassion with yourself. It's because that's what I was having to do to move myself out of these states. So it's part executive function, but there's also something called a functional freeze response. And that is another part of it that can be linked to any kind of emotional trauma. Some people believe that ADHD is linked to trauma, that it's a coping mechanism. I'm not sure how much I agree with that, other than that our brains are just wired. We function differently. We're more creative. And so in March, I hit one of these moments again. I had been going along really well. And out of the blue, I hit one of these moments again where it seemed, so I didn't talk about the distraction piece. I'm actually pretty focused right now, doing this with no notes and staying on track. I recorded this as a podcast episode 2 weeks ago, and there was so much ADHD coming through that by the time I edited, it was not anything that was cohesive and presentable. So, distractions. It was nothing for me to have 40 tabs open on my computer, and I would be attempting to multitask 3 or 4 things. I would start doing one thing and it would trigger a reminder, oh, I have to go do this. So then I would jump over into another tab and I would have like 3, 4 things going and nothing finished. And even though I know it's been proven that multitasking doesn't actually help you accomplish more, I had to multitask a lot in anesthesia. So I didn't really think anything about that. But I really just hit this point where I was like, it should not be so challenging. I should not have to exert so much mental energy to do something. It should not take this much energy, attention, and focus to do something so simple. And I guess it was around December. I had actually seen a video of a husband and a wife. And he was saying, I'm neurotypical and she's neurodivergent. He's like, honey, describe to them what you do when you wake up in the morning. And she goes through her process of processing her day. And I was like, yes, so I do that. And then he says, I don't think about any of those things. Like there is zero mental energy on any of that. They're just habits. I just get up and do it. I never give it a single thought. And I thought, well, that's curious. And I began to see a little bit more of that. So in March, when all of this hit, and I was just, I'll be honest, a little self diagnosis here. I think I was starting to get a little bit depressed because I was tired of this. I found someone locally. It's a small town, but I happened to find someone locally, hadn't been around that long. They specialize in ADHD and they use an objective test. And this was important to me. I didn't want somebody doing a questionnaire and based on their assumptions of things that maybe they didn't ask for context for. I got tested and boy, I'm wildly hyperactive, which I never knew. I never knew I was hyperactive. So going back to the beginning of the live, if you're just now popping in, I talked about 25 years in healthcare as a nurse and a nurse anesthetist. It beautifully masked my hyperactivity, one. And number two, when you're walking 12 to 16,000 steps a day, exercise is one of the things that can help you with your dopamine regulation. So when I left healthcare and I went full time in my business and I'm spending a few hours every day behind this computer, I now understand why I would get overstimulated and I would need to go outside. There were days I would go take a 2, 3 hour lunch break by the pool. And I now know it's because sitting at the desk, I did not have the physical outlet for all of this hyperactivity. I was 2.6 standard deviations off the mean, which means I'm more hyperactive than 99% of people. So, what has this done for me? Because I'm going to loop this back around to hypnosis here. It has helped me to understand the way that I operate and things that I can do to optimize my life. Quite accidentally, I figured out on my own over the last year that consuming sugar or any flour processed product, I always feel worse. And on a fluke last year, I decided to, for a month or so, to allow myself to be in a deep state of ketosis. I'm not talking a ketogenic diet. I mean, a deep state of ketosis, very low protein, very low carb, very high fat. I have never been so mentally clear, focused, slept so well, and felt so calm in my life. However, I don't personally believe that living in that state all of the time is healthy. So when I reached out to this provider, they did a very objective test. And this is one of the things that people have asked me about. Share what you learned and what you've done. So I went to a provider that did an objective test, and it is a test called the QB test. And they use this test at this particular clinic because there are over 100,000 data points, and there are a lot of midlife women who are in these data sets to compare to. So this was the most insane thing. They put this little headband on. It's got a little metal ball. They have it looks like a camera, but it's actually a tracking device. She said it was a camera, but it only looks at the ball. And they put you in front of the computer and they give you a clicker and they give you a little test to do. And they tell you it's going to last for 20 minutes. I have never in my life had such a hard time being still. I was trying so hard to be still because I know the thing is tracking me. And I believe they tell you that intentionally, that you know it's tracking you. So, sorry about that. It was a phone call came through there. Let's see. There we go. There we go. Okay, phone call. Sorry. So I believe they tell you intentionally that thing is tracking you because I was exerting so much mental focus to be still. It was exhausting. And the test that they did was so simple. It's absolutely insane. But to not get distracted and keep track was difficult. So I was diagnosed with combined type ADHD with a huge hyperactive component. That was my biggest component off the charts. She shared with me a lot of different things that in my life that could have impacted that. She asked me questions around relationships. Did I have a lot of friends in school? How was I with grades? And I'm like, oh, I always had good grades, but like I was the one who was scrambling getting my homework done in homeroom, in hopes that the teacher wouldn't put me up in front of the class and chastise me for my assignments not being done. Um, so it was that kind of thing that we talked about. So I never had poor grades or anything like that. And she said that's one of the reasons why women are often not diagnosed as children, because we don't have the huge hyperactivity component externally. We tend to internalize that. So I'm going to share for things. None of this is medical advice. This is me personally, what I am doing. I said yes to medication because I had to have an immediate shift in the way things were happening. And this was really at her behest because anxiety and depression are huge comorbidities with ADHD. Because even though of all the emotional work I had done, she said, when you know you can do things and you cannot get them done, it impacts you negatively, emotionally, even when you've done all the work, because you will wonder what is happening that you can't do it. And she said, you're exhausting a ton of mental energy on that. And she actually said, I follow you on Facebook and I love your work. And she said, you need to address this because I don't want to see you crash. And that is what's going to happen if we don't address it. The one thing I do try to do is really limit my carbs, like not ketosis. I don't do ketosis, but I do my best to avoid processed sugars, flours, added sugar. It really helps. And here's why it helps. It's because there's a huge amount of dopamine dysregulation in ADHD. And when we eat sugars and processed foods, some dyes, when we watch social media, oh my gosh, like getting on social media to find videos to stitch for marketing and things like that, the dopamine hits that you get there, you get a really fast rise in dopamine, but then you get a huge crash that goes below baseline. And it puts you in the state of chasing dopamine. If you have ADHD, avoid the sugars, get rid of the sugars, get rid of the flowers, do your best to go to bed at a regular time. Other things that I was doing personally before I met her, and she said, keep doing these things are great. I take magnesium. She had me switch types of magnesium. So I did switch types that will help. And no, I'm not going to share specifics on that because this is not medical advice. And I do have a nursing license and I have to be very careful what I share here. I had also explored the MTHFR gene. I've never gene tested, but what happens with the motherfucker gene, okay? Um, that's its nickname, pardon my French. You can have a buildup of what are called homocysteine levels, and those homocysteine levels can increase your risk of the anxiety and depression. And I was taking this supplement called betaine anhydrous. You can find it online, but don't go out and take it because there are health conditions where you don't want to lower your homocysteine levels. But I specifically was taking it. You see the little puffy eyes. Periodically, I have issues with inflammation, especially when allergies kick up. That's why I was taking it. She told me that elevated homocysteine levels contribute to anxiety and depression. She said, keep taking it, stay on a very steady dose, don't alter it. And when you come in next time, so when I go in next month, they're actually going to check my blood levels of homocysteine and see how that is impacting my life. Another thing that I love to do, and I don't do this every day, but I will take ashwagandha to just help to calm me. I'm starting to take more walks. I still do time blocking. Time blocking helps me because I can move the blocks, but I'm going to be honest with you. Since you started me on Adderall, in about 2 or 3 hours, I can get more work done than what I used to spend 8 to 10 hours. And I can do it without exhausting myself mentally. So I actually have energy to do other things in the evening that I enjoy. So with hypnosis, a lot of people think, I see it all the time. I don't believe I can be hypnotized. I have ADHD. My mind is always racing. Now, my mind never raced that much until like the last year and a half. And I have a theory as to why that started happening. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But I have always been able to go very deep into hypnosis very quickly. And I clearly have impulsive, distractive, hyperactive ADHD. Some of the things that amplify those ADHD symptoms are if we have had trauma, if we have been judged, criticized, maybe somebody told us we were lazy or you're not that stupid. What's wrong with you? Nobody ever said that to me, but I've heard people say that. If you have caught flack your entire life because people didn't understand you, you are carrying that mental and emotional stress and impact. Hypnosis is great for releasing past emotional baggage. Because if we don't properly process our emotions, we carry that stuff in the subconscious. It becomes a filter of our expectations of what other people are going to think of us, of whether or not we have good self-esteem about ourselves based on the feedback we've gotten through life of whether we're smart enough, we're good enough, we're talented enough. Can we get the job done? Because I am very good at starting things. My entire life, my mother has told me, she goes, Penny, you don't finish anything you start. And when I did my human design, there's this component of, part of the experimentation part of is you do things until you get out of it what you like, and then you're very easy about releasing it and moving on. That's one thing, but what about when it's something you want to get done? I have heard coaches say, if you're not getting it done, you're not 100% committed. And that never really sat well with me. I get the concept, but it never sat well with me. And now that I've had this diagnosis of ADHD, I'm like, oh my God, the things that were I picked up through coaching, that this is your problem if you're not achieving. It's like, no wonder I have been gaslighting myself. So I'm going to close the loop I opened a moment ago, where I talked about how I wasn't a huge overthinker. My thoughts never really overwhelmed me until like the last year and a half or so. And I will tell you what happened in January of last year. I got really, I wouldn't say serious, I got consistent about marketing over on TikTok, doing market research on TikTok, and kind of playing around on Instagram. You see, Facebook doesn't. I don't do the reels on Facebook in terms of consuming. I read the text post, but on Instagram and TikTok, it's all short form video. Those are like slot machines. It's dopamine hit after dopamine hit after dopamine hit. So by looking at things, doing market research, getting sucked in, it was firing off my dopamine like crazy. And I think that what has happened over the last year and a half is my dopamine regulation or dysregulation got out of control because I was doing these short hits and I had no idea that it was impacting me in this way. So, hypnosis can not only help with the emotional regulation, hypnosis can help you with focus and attention. And I actually did some research into this because executive function is a huge deal for people. So I dug into the research out there, and yes, hypnosis will improve your executive functioning skills. Now, one caveat, I have not found anything that speaks to the long term effects of a single hypnosis process. So let me back up and say, explain what I mean. There are different types of hypnosis. There's self-hypnosis you can do every day. There's hypnosis audios you can listen to every day. And then there is directed root cause hypnosis, which is what I do. And typically I work with people for, a couple of weeks to 8 weeks. I've had clients I've worked with for 6 months who really want to overhaul their life and consistently up level. And they want me by their side as they peel these layers. They want me on tap. They don't want me out of mind, because they'll wait until things get too bad, to reach out again. I couldn't find any evidence that if you do that short, intense hypnosis, that root cause hypnosis work, that it will sustain executive function. I can tell you it will sustain the emotional effects because I've done the work. I've done the work myself. When you shift perceptions, you process old emotions, you will have a lifetime improvement provided you continue to be emotionally intelligent and process through what it is that you're feeling. So, when we address the emotions, what we're really doing is we're getting in there. The limbic system is active. We are dealing with the amygdala. And when we can neutralize those unnecessary fears and concerns that we are carrying, then the fear based input into dopamine release gets neutralized, provided we learn to manage our attention and master our thoughts so that we're not thinking fearful thoughts and worrying and throwing ourselves into a spiral. Now, I will say, Dr. Andrew Huberman, he's very dry, he's academic. Like, I probably would have cried if he was my professor. He has 2 podcasts over on YouTube. One is a couple of years old and one is newer, about dopamine regulation. So just go to YouTube, search Andrew Huberman or the Huberman Lab and dopamine regulation. These are very long podcasts, but they have timestamp lists in the description on YouTube. He specifically goes through the things that will raise your dopamine that you should avoid because they give you short-term hits. And in the case of ADHD, they're going to make your dopamine dysregulation worse. Then he talks about things that you can do that are a slow, steady dopamine level. And those are the things that you want to focus on if dopamine is something you want to address. I can tell you right away, social media detox, like the short-term video stuff, get it out of your life. Unless you absolutely have to be on there, and then set yourself a timer, get in, get out, cut the sugar, cut the processed foods, cut the dyes, get out and take a walk. Those are some of the best things that you can do. And if you think you have ADHD, if you are beating yourself up, if you are at your wit's end and it seems like you are using every bit of mental, emotional energy you have just to get things done, and you're thinking to yourself, my God, this should be so much easier, go find yourself a licensed professional who does an objective ADHD evaluation like the QB test that I mentioned, and get yourself tested. I honestly didn't think I was going to test out positive. I was like, you know what? I'm going to go in here and they're going to think I'm crazy and I'm looking for attention. And this is just going to be proof that I need to get my act together. That's actually what I was thinking when I scheduled it. And I was having a good week the week before my appointment, and I almost canceled it. I said, no, you're going in, you're going to get this done. And I'm really glad I did. And at the beginning, I said something about neurodivergent. Um, I don't think the word divergent means apart from it, like where you're segmented off of, you've diverged from the normal, right? Neurotypical, neurodivergent. I believe we just process differently. So it's not a label that I accept. And what this has been for me is information, how I can regulate myself, how I can regulate my life, and how I can really take myself, my business, my impact to the places that I want to go, and to do it without being hard on myself. You know, we can be our own worst critic. And even with all the mindset work I've done and being aware of that and managing myself, it would still come up. And my provider, she's a nurse practitioner. She's amazing. And that was why she said it's important that I got diagnosed and that I'm doing something about it. Because if that continues, then it can create other issues around self-esteem, self-belief, and lead to anxiety and depression. So, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this live. I will be ripping this audio and will be posting a podcast tomorrow. So, if rather than watching the video, you would rather listen to the audio, this Instagram live will be on my podcast, raw, unedited, just like it is. And you can go back and have a listen anytime. You guys have a great day.